organizers were really concerned about whether or not this was going to really be the success they needed to kind of rivet the country's attention to, the civil rights movement. However, I guess I was standing there, and right below the Washington Monument, there was sort of a platform stage there and all. And I believe it was Peter, Paul, and Mary. They were kind of entertaining while people were gathering. And then I realized there were parts of the crowd I couldn't see because they were all around there. So probably there were several thousand, but still in the size of the mall, it didn't seem to be like really packed yet. Stood there and listened to the music and sort of waited, looked at my watch, when is this going to start, that kind of thing. And then reports started coming in, because every now and then somebody would come to the microphone and make an announcement, what they were waiting for or whatever. And they announced that they had gotten some really tremendous news. They were getting reports from, I guess, people that monitor traffic and all that. Buses upon buses were literally coming up from the south, coming through Virginia, coming through certain tollways or whatever, and the same thing was happening from the north, like coming down maybe through Baltimore's Harbor Tunnel and coming down the Parkway. That, just dozens upon dozens of buses, and they realized this thing is going to be a hit. So we waited a little longer, and of course the people were arriving, and you could see the crowd building and swelling then. And I remember A. Philip Randolph coming to the microphone at one point, and he was saying, you had us scared there for a while. You know how you are, he said, about coming on time. And everybody broke out laughing. So it seemed to be a little bit more of a wait. And then all of a sudden, I saw Mr. Randolph and Dr. King was up on the platform, and they sort of just came down and started the march, and when they did it, I was really sort of surprised, because they came down on the side where I was, and when they started marching, really, they weren't that far ahead of me. I mean, if I'd really trotted a little bit, I could have gone up and touched them all on the shoulder or whatever. So I'm saying, well, I've got a pretty good position here. So we walked up the street, and as we walked toward the Lincoln Memorial area, and we would be passing other intersections of streets pouring into that mall area. If you looked up those streets, you just saw people literally pouring down those streets. And that's when I realized this is going to be everything they wanted, and maybe then some. And I mean, and at that point when I realized the size of the crowd, and then you began to feel, and you really could almost palpably feel the spirit of the crowd. I'd never been in such a large crowd before. So it was really a wonderful feeling to experience a crowd that was all bent on a single purpose, showing their advocacy for jobs and freedom, and yet absolutely determined to do it in a peaceful manner. I mean, you could feel it. You could feel the singularity of purpose. It was almost like something that transported you out of yourself. And literally, you just got mentally and psychologically swept up into the movement, and that's what it was. And so we were moving forward, and I saw things that were pretty touching too, like, a person with a disability might be right at the corner sitting there watching people passing by in his wheelchair. A total stranger passing by would say, "Do you want to join the march?" And he would nod, and they would just take his wheelchair with them, and he became part of it. But it was that kind of spirit of camaraderie and fellowship. So by the time we got up to the Lincoln Memorial area, I mean, I was really elated. By now I'm really into this thing. And I looked at my watch, and we still had quite a long time to go before the actual program started. So I decided, what the heck, I'll go back and march up again, because I really wanted just to see it all. So I went pretty far back toward the Washington Monument and marched up again, and just feeling the whole spirit of the crowd and all. Of course, I lost my place, which was a prime place, as it turned out to be, in front of the Lincoln Memorial. But this time when I got up to where, you couldn't go any farther because of the crowd, people were in the trees. I mean, people were on anything they could get on to get a good viewing spot. And accidentally, I ran into the professors from my seminary, where I was a seminarian, and I had no idea they were going to be there. Some other seminarians were there. At that time, I was the only African-American seminarian studying to be a Catholic priest in my seminary, which was the main seminary in the country, connected to Rome. And so I really never thought that anyone from the seminary would actually feel that kind of sense of duty or responsibility to come to the march. I just thought this would be my thing, and I'm going to do it. But when I got there and I saw some of my fellow seminarians and some of my teachers, some of the priests who were my teachers, really there, you know, and standing strong, I was moved by that. And then one of them said, "The Archbishop is here," and Archbishop Sheehan, Lawrence Sheehan, who later became Cardinal Sheehan, was fairly new as Baltimore's Archbishop. And they pointed him out, and I looked over, and there he was. And that really, to me, was a tremendous thing, because he wasn't there as a big official, you know, or someone that was going to be up on the platform and all of that. He was among the crowd in the masses, you know, standing there supporting with his priests, supporting everything. So I felt great now, because I was with my, you know, partners and colleagues. And then from then on, the day that you all know about is history. And as we said, you know, everybody knows about the speech, which literally galvanized the crowd. But so much of that program, I mean, A. Philip Randolph's speech was stirring, and people really saw him as the really, up until King's speech, the focal point of everything that was happening, because he was a key organizer of it. The singing, all of it was just really great. And when it ended, I don't know how, I mean, you just dispersed. It's almost like you were floating in your mind or something, and you just somehow or other found your way where you needed to go, got back on the train and came back home. But, and I wanted to get home in time to see the evening news, just to see what, you know, the news was saying about the day. So when I got back to my home, I cut the TV on, and I remember at that time there was a newscaster named Harry Reasoner, so it must have been ABC, I guess it was then. And I really liked him. He had a very down-to-earth, straightforward approach when he gave the news. So he talked about it, and at the end of, you know, the film clips and all that they had of it, he just looked up at the camera and he said, "I guess what you could say at least is that all those people went to all that trouble to tell us something today. The very least we could do is have the decency to listen." And I never forgot that, because you could tell that was coming from his heart. And that was that wonderful day to me, a day like I haven't experienced since, in terms of actually feeling the spirit of a whole crowd of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And then watching Dr. King really galvanize the crowd. And to me, at that point, he really did assume the mantle of being the spokesperson for the movement, for the whole movement.
That's wonderful. What was the most lasting impact, I guess you would say, for you, in terms of what surprised you after them being in the march that changed?
The fact that the country really did have to pay attention. There were so many people, and a demonstration of that size had never happened before, that Congress couldn't do the kind of stuff you see Congress doing now. I mean, it had to be paid attention to. The president had to respond. There was no way to get around it. And I believe the leaders, you know, of course, were invited to the White House and all of that. But clearly, I think it really was one of those major points in the formation of the conscience of the country. I was talking to someone here at the museum last year, and she said something that I had never thought about before. She talked about the importance of children to the civil rights movement. And she said, think about it, you know, when Bull Connor was sicking the police dogs on adults and all, people felt bad about it, and they would say, oh, that's terrible, that shouldn't happen. But you don't feel so strongly about adults, who you feel will do what they need to do at some point, I guess, as you do feel about children being attacked with water hoses or having vicious dogs sicked on them. And she said when the country saw that on the news, she said that's when people said, we may be a lot of things and we may have a lot to improve, but we're not like that. And that's when, because of what was happening to children, what they saw happening to children, that the country's conscience about civil rights actually turned, to favor it. And I saw this as another kind of instance of really strengthening or confirming the conscience of the country that, no, this is the direction we're going in.